Black women are dying every single day. It's not hyperbole, it's not poetic, it's just the real deal of what is happening.
In America, some Black women enter delivery rooms to bring life into the world. But their families leave with a newborn and a hospital bed without a mother. Each year, more than 200 Black moms die from pregnancy or childbirth-related complications, almost one every other day. For many Black women, that fear is not abstract. They know what it means when pain is dismissed and help comes too late. So what did history hide that still makes so many African Americans cautious around doctors, vaccines, and medical experiments? This is Hidden Black Chronicles, and together we bring buried stories back into the light. Today, we reopen 10 horrifying experiments from slavery's past. And the final story may make many Black women never see delivery rooms the same way again. Number 1. Gynecological surgery. Some delivery rooms do not just bring a child into the world, they also give birth to fear. For many African American women today, walking into a hospital while pregnant is not simply about placing their body in the hands of medicine. It is a silent negotiation over whether their pain will be believed by the doctors at all, because there have been too many Black mothers who waited in desperation to be treated like an emergency. And by the time the emergency room doors finally opened, it was already too late to bring things back. In 2023, CDC-NCHS recorded the maternal mortality rate for non-Hispanic Black women in America at about 50.3 deaths per 100,000 live births. For non-Hispanic white women, that number was only about 14.5. Same pregnancy, same hospitals, same modern healthcare system, but the risk for a Black mother was nearly 3.5 times higher. So why, in a field of medicine that once learned so much from the bodies of Black women, do they still have to enter delivery rooms feeling like their pain must be proven? To understand that question, we have to go back to Alabama between 1845 and 1849, where Dr. J. Marion Sims performed gynecological surgeries on enslaved Black women. 3 names are often remembered: Anarcha, Lucy, and Betsy, young enslaved women in Alabama. But history mostly remembers them through illness and surgery, as if they entered the record not with full lives of their own, but with bodies placed under experiment. The condition Sims was treating was vesicovaginal fistula, a serious childbirth injury that could happen after obstructed labor. It was a condition that needed treatment because it could leave a woman living with pain, infection, isolation, and the loss of privacy inside her own body. But under slavery, the question was not only how the condition was treated. The deeper question was who had the power to decide whose body that treatment would be tested on. Enslaved Black women did not stand before doctors as free patients. Before medicine called them cases, the law had already called them property. On Southern plantations, their labor belonged to enslavers. Their ability to bear children was also pulled into the economy of slavery, because children born to enslaved women were often treated as new property. A mother injured after childbirth was not first seen as a woman who needed rest and care. She was seen as weakened labor, threatened reproductive value, a property that needed to be restored so she could keep serving the system. But if we only see them as victims, then history takes something from them all over again. Anarcha, Lucy, Betsy, and so many other Black women were also mothers. They were women who lived through a world determined to strip them of protection and the right to raise their own children. Even in the most suffocating conditions, they carried motherhood, endurance, dignity, and a kind of strength that medical records rarely knew how to honor. And this story did not belong only to women. We also have to think about the husbands, fathers, and loved ones in enslaved communities who watched the women they loved suffer with no power to protect them, no court to appeal to, and no law standing on the side of their families. This system did not only wound Black women's bodies, it also stripped Black husbands and fathers of the right to protect their own homes. For many African American women today, that past did not end in 19th century Alabama. It returns when they bring a husband, mother, sister, or doula into the clinic, not only for emotional support, but to have one more person confirm that they are truly in pain, It shows up in symptom notes typed into a phone because they fear that if they do not explain clearly enough, the doctor may brush them aside. That fear is not weakness. It is the living memory of a community that has seen medicine take too much from Black women's bodies and too often move too slowly when it was time to protect them. And if, even today, a Black mother still has to enter the delivery room with unease in her heart, then those horrifying experiments have not truly gone to sleep in the past. They still leave us with one question. What must a system that once took so much from the pain of Black women do now to prove that it truly knows how to protect them? Number 2. Ovarian removal. More than 150 years have passed since ovarian removal was promoted as a solution for women's illness, emotions, and even their so-called disobedience. But when we look at the present, the question of Black women's fertility has not become any lighter. Some statistics show that about 11.9% of Black women face infertility. Millions of women still walk into clinics with the same fear. Something is wrong with my body, but will the system listen soon enough? In the 1870s, surgeon Robert Batty popularized a procedure known as Batty's operation, the removal of the ovaries, medically called oophorectomy. At first, it was introduced as a treatment for certain serious gynecological conditions. But when we look deeper into the world around it, the story does not stop at treatment. The ovaries slowly became an explanation for too many things that male medicine at the time did not want to hear from women. Pelvic pain, menstrual disorders, nervous distress, long periods of exhaustion, or simply a woman who did not behave the way society expected her to. To be clear, not every ovarian removal is wrong. In modern medicine, there are cases where this procedure is necessary to save a woman's life or protect her health. But the frightening part of this history is that for women with little power, especially Black women, their bodies were often cut into before their voices were ever taken seriously. By Batty's time, slavery may have ended on paper, but the way the system looked at Black women's bodies did not disappear with a single law. Before that, their wombs had been treated as part of the slaveholding economy, a place that could produce more labor, more property, more profit. But when that same body was in pain, exhausted, resistant, or no longer functioning the way society wanted it to, it could be labeled as diseased, disordered, something that needed to be removed. If both ovaries were removed, a woman's ability to become pregnant naturally could end forever. She could enter surgical menopause, face hormonal changes, changes in her sexual life, anxiety, depression, and a wound that touched the sacred, right to motherhood. It was the feeling that her future as a mother had been decided by someone else. And when we look at the present, this story still leaves us with a heavy question. Ovarian removal is not the direct cause of the modern infertility crisis, but it belongs to a long history where Black women's fertility was violated too many times. So when a Black woman today walks into a fertility clinic, has to research her own condition, pay large amounts of money just to be heard, and wonder whether a doctor will see her pain is real, can we truly say that this past is completely over? If this story touched your heart, please don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video so together with Hidden Black Chronicles, we can bring buried memories back into the light. Number 3. Syphilis experiment. In 1932, in Macon County, Alabama, the United States Public Health Service began a study involving hundreds of poor Black men, most of them sharecroppers. They were not nameless figures on a medical chart. They were husbands, they were fathers, they were working men trying to survive in an America that still had segregated schools, segregated housing, segregated hospitals, and grand promises about freedom and democracy from a nation that called itself great. They were told they were being treated for bad blood, a vague phrase used for many different health problems. But behind that unclear language was a bone-chilling truth. Many of them had syphilis, and instead of being told the full truth about their condition, instead of being given a real choice, they were watched so researchers could see how the disease would progress. Even when penicillin became the standard treatment, the silence continued. When we look closely at this story, the most painful part is not only that the study was wrong, It is that these men walked into those clinics with the ordinary trust of poor patients, believing the people in white coats were there to help them. They trusted the vague explanation of bad blood. They trusted the appointments. They trusted that they were receiving care. But that very trust became the door the system used to enter their bodies, observe their illness, and withhold the truth they deserve to know. That is why, for many African American families, Tuskegee is not just the name of a medical study. It became a warning passed down through generations. A father may not tell the full history of 1932. A mother may not use the words medical ethics to condemn the system, but they understand what it means to be asked to trust and then be betrayed by the very place that was supposed to protect them. That suspicion did not come from ignorance. It came from ancestral memory, from the times black people walked into clinics looking for care, only to be turned into subjects of experimentation, with their lives at risk at any moment. And when that memory is passed from grandparents to parents and from parents to children, caution is no longer an irrational fear. It becomes a lesson in survival. When history has treated black bodies as something to experiment on, control, and use, can we really ask people today to be brave enough to trust the very institutions that once took the lives of their ancestors? Number 4, phrenology. Some of the most dangerous lies do not come as insults. They show up in textbooks, in laboratories, in classroom lectures, in measuring tools, and in reports that were called science. And that is what made phrenology so dangerous. It did not just insult black people. It made an entire society believe that insult came with evidence. In the 19th century, while the Southern plantation economy depended on the forced labor of millions of enslaved people, theories like phrenology began to be used to measure skulls, head shapes, and brain size. Its supporters claimed they could read a person's intelligence, morality, and character through the structure of the skull. But when we look closer, that so-called science was not really searching for truth. It was searching for a way to prove a conclusion that had already been made, that black people were inferior, less intelligent, less sensitive, and therefore could be forced into brutal labor, controlled, punished, or treated as a class born to obey. On plantations, enslaved people were forced to work in cotton fields, sugarcane fields, and tobacco fields. In many places, they were denied the right to read, the right to build a legally protected family, and the right to testify in court. But to keep such a brutal system alive, enslavers did not rely only on whips or harsh laws. They also needed a story to justify themselves. Phrenology and racial science gave them that story. If black people could be described as naturally inferior, then oppression could be disguised as order. But what they did not understand is this: black ancestors did not become smaller just because someone tried to measure them with the wrong tools. They were still fathers, mothers, builders of families, keepers of faith, and carriers of strength from one generation to the next. A system could try to turn them into measurements on paper, but it could not erase their intelligence, their dignity, or their power to survive. And even today, the shadow of those false beliefs has not completely disappeared. Modern studies still show that black patients can have their pain dismissed or receive slower care. Phrenology did not only insult black intelligence in the past, it also helped create a dangerous habit. The habit of doubting black bodies even now. So if a black person today still walks into a hospital feeling like they have to prove their pain is real, can we truly say that this false science is dead? Or did it simply change its name and hide inside the way the system listens to them? Number 5, vaccine experiment. Before it was eradicated, smallpox killed around 300 million people worldwide in the 20th century alone. But for enslaved black people, packed into slave quarters, living with poor sanitation, little medicine, and forced to work until their bodies were worn down in cotton fields, sugarcane fields, and tobacco fields, a smallpox outbreak could tear a whole family apart in just a few weeks. But what history books often leave out is this: even when medicine tried to prevent disease, enslaved black people did not enter that story as willing participants. From the early 19th century, during smallpox vaccination campaigns and other early forms of disease prevention, many enslaved people could be brought forward to be inoculated, watched for reactions, isolated, or used as part of medical testing and public health practice, with almost no real power to refuse. For enslavers, vaccination was not simply some beautiful act of saving lives. On a plantation, every enslaved person was seen as part of the production system. If disease spread, there would be no one to pick the cotton, no one to cut the sugar cane, no one to cure the tobacco, and profit would be threatened. So a shot could be called prevention. But when it was placed into the body of a person with no control over their own life, it was no longer just medicine. In practice, it turned that body into something the system could use, observe, and test in the name of protecting labor and profit. And there is another bitter layer to this history. Some of America's knowledge about smallpox prevention came from enslaved Africans, people who already knew forms of disease prevention from their homelands. But instead of being honored as carriers of knowledge, they lived in a society that called their intelligence inferior, while treating their bodies as something that could be used at any time. So when many African American families today hear the word vaccine and feel hesitation, we should not rush to call that ignorance. It is the memory of a community that once gave knowledge to medicine, while medicine and power still took away their right to decide what happened to their own bodies. Number 6. Forced medical experimentation. Some stories sound so unreal that at first people might think they are just rumors. A black man was placed in the hands of a doctor, not to be healed, but to see how much his body could endure, how his skin would react, how much pain he could take, what strong drugs, chemicals, and wounds on his skin could reveal about the so-called black body. And the bitterest part is this: it did not happen in some secret basement. It happened in a society that called itself civilized. That man was John Brown, a man who had once been enslaved in Georgia. In his memoir, he wrote about Dr. Thomas Hamilton, a white doctor who used his body for painful experiments on the skin. Hamilton did not see Brown as a patient. He saw Brown as living evidence for the sick racial theories of that time, that black people were different, that they could endure more pain, and therefore could be experimented on without even being asked. And a doctor like Hamilton could not have done that without the whole system of slavery standing behind him. White enslavers owned the labor of enslaved people. The law protected the enslavers. Society looked away. And medicine, the very thing that was supposed to save lives, sometimes became another hand of that same system. When a black person had already been called property by the law, their body could be brought into a clinic like an object, to be tested, measured, recorded, and then thrown away. But John Brown did not disappear into silence. He survived, and he left behind his testimony, so future generations would know that black ancestors fought to hold on to their dignity in a world that tried to turn them into property. And Brown's own words became one way he took back his humanity from the people who once tried to turn him into an experiment. That is why John Brown's story deserves to be written into the history books, not as a small footnote on the side, but as evidence of the crimes of a system that once allowed enslavers and doctors to stand together over black bodies. Because a nation cannot only teach about medical progress while staying silent about the bodies that were experimented on to help build that progress. If stories like this are left out, then that is no longer just a gap in history. That is a cover-up. Number 7. C-section surgery. Before C-section became a procedure that could save both mother and child, it was once a decision that stood right on the edge between life and death. Basically, the doctor would cut through the mother's abdominal wall, then cut into the uterus to take the baby out. Today, that surgery happens in a modern operating room, with anesthesia, sterilization, medication, equipment, and a medical team watching closely. But in the 1800s, everything was different. After a surgery like that, a mother could die from blood loss, infection, shock, or from a wound that doctors simply could not control the way modern medicine can. For enslaved black women, the horror was not only in the blade. It was in who had the power to decide. Doctors like Dr. Cutter appeared in a time when a black mother did not enter surgery as a free patient. Her body was placed between the doctor, the enslaver, and the interests of the plantation. The mother was labor. The child inside her could be seen as future property. And inside that cruel logic, the question was no longer, What does the mother want? The question became, what can be saved for the society of that time? But that woman was not just a uterus in a medical record. She was a mother who wanted to live, who wanted to hold her child, who wanted to return to her family. Behind her, there may have been a helpless husband, an elderly mother praying, a community waiting in fear for any news.
So C-section during slavery was not only a dangerous technique, it was also the moment when a black mother's body could be opened inside a system that did not see her as free.
Was that surgery truly healing? Or was it one more time her right to motherhood was placed in someone else's hands? Number 8. Skin temperature. Experiment. In the 19th century, as racial science was spreading, black bodies were measured like biological machines. Doctors and researchers like Dr. Gould appeared in a time when skin, body temperature, reactions to heat and cold, heart rate, sweat, and endurance could all be turned into experimental data. But that data often served a purpose that was already decided: to prove that black people were supposedly more suited for brutal labor, better at handling heat, better at enduring pain, and therefore could be pushed into cotton fields, sugarcane fields, and tobacco fields under even harsher conditions. Skin temperature experiments did not stay inside the clinic. They connected directly to the plantation. If a white doctor could say that black bodies handled heat differently, enslavers had one more excuse to force them to work longer under the burning sun. If medicine said they felt less pain, then the whip and the neglect became easier to justify. A lie dressed up as science could become a longer workday, a wound taken less seriously, a life valued even less. And that shadow still reaches into today. Modern medicine has had to confront many biased standards that used race to adjust how black bodies were measured, from the lungs to the kidneys to the way pain is evaluated. But if you think this story is already the lowest point of that horror, the next part will make us look at medicine during slavery with an even darker understanding. Number 9. Ether anesthesia abuse. In 1846, ether was introduced as a turning point in modern surgery. Before that, many operations happened in extreme pain. With ether, doctors could have patients breathe the vapor through a cloth, sponge, or simple inhaler, making them lose consciousness during surgery. In theory, it was a life-saving breakthrough. It promised that people would no longer have to stay awake under the knife. But from the 1850s to the 1900s, ether anesthesia was still dangerous. Doctors had no modern monitors, no safe control of breathing, and dosage often came from experience. Too little, and the patient could wake up mid-surgery or still feel pain. Too much, and their life could be at risk. And enslaved black people, then poor black patients after slavery, often faced that deadly risk with the least protection. In a society taught to believe black people could endure more pain, easing their suffering was not always treated as urgent. Ether existed, but proper anesthesia still depended on whether a doctor believed their pain was real. And that question still reaches into the present. When a community was once taught to stay silent through pain, how can they enter an operating room without fearing their pain will be dismissed again? Number 10. Torture and mutilation. From around the early 17th century to 1865, many enslaved black people in America could be branded, mutilated, disfigured, or left with permanent wounds, simply for running away, disobeying orders, learning to read, speaking back, or being suspected of rebellion. The most barbaric part was not only the torture itself, it was the purpose behind it. White enslavers wanted to turn black bodies into living warning signs. Anyone who ran would be punished. Anyone who spoke up would be silenced. Anyone who resisted would be broken in front of others. In many runaway slave advertisements from that time, people even described scars, branded marks, cut ears, or other physical traces as ways to identify them. In other words, the brutality was not only carried out, it was recorded, advertised, and normalized. Those punishments were not some small side note in history. They were part of how slavery ruled black people through fear, torture, and the destruction of both body and spirit. But in so many classrooms, these things are either softened or left out, as if they are too horrifying to be put into books. Because if America only teaches that slavery was forced labor, but does not teach how enslavers tortured and dehumanized people, then that is not the full history. That is a cover-up written in silence. Today's stories show us a painful truth about slavery. Black bodies were once turned by medicine, slavery, and power into places of experimentation, control, and hidden crimes. They were mothers, fathers, and ancestors who endured, survived, and left memory behind for the generations after them. And if the fear of hospitals, delivery rooms, or operating rooms still echoes today, then our responsibility is to make sure silence does not win again. This is Hidden Black Chronicles, and our mission is to bring buried stories back into the light. Please like, subscribe, and share this video so this memory does not stay buried in silence.